I would say in Buddhism, maybe there's a very strong emphasis on, you could say, working with the quality of aloneness and in the sense of working with one's own state of mind. Not quite in a vacuum situation, but sometimes we do retreats and things like that. And we intensify or increase the intensity and experience of working with one's own state of mind without any kind of distraction or seduction, from looking at our relationship with others. So first, we're just looking at our own relationship to our own state of mind, and that's a very important part of the Buddhist training. Up to the point where many great teachers that we know and know of have even spent years in retreats by themselves. Tenzin Palmo, who wrote that book Cave in the Snow, which I totally recommend to anybody who wants to get a taste of retreat life. Khyentse Rinpoche, I've mentioned before, spent 15 years in retreat. So, obviously from a conventional point of view, you go well, that's kind of austere in a way. And just want to look at that dimension of why we'd consider sort of practicing that particular way. It might seem antisocial to some. So I wanted to start tonight by acknowledging the loss of a dear friend. And in a sense, it fits into what we're talking about here. And many of you may know this friend we're going to talk about, and some of you may not. But his name is Shamdas. So if you're at all active in the yoga community or the kirtan chanting community, and I imagine the word has gotten around, but if not, Shamdas, who was a very vivacious and kind of, I call him singular, unique, and high energy, and very well educated and powerful individual, and good friend of all of ours, died in a motorcycle accident, I think on Saturday, over the weekend. And he was in Goa, India. He was apparently riding back from a party with a group of people there at dinner. And his girlfriend Ali was on the back of the bike, and people seemed to think that they swerved to avoid an oncoming car or motorcycle coming the other direction. And Sham didn't make it. They got him to the hospital pretty quickly, but he had severe internal injuries, and he passed away that night. So Ali, and for those of you who are just hearing this for the first time, his girlfriend did survive. She had pretty serious injuries, but according to what I've heard, she's going to be okay. So the message that synchronizes up here with what we're talking about is that no matter what happens in between, in terms of our communion and our karma and our interaction, we're born alone and we die alone. It's cliche, but it's significant. And even to the extent when two people have, the image in my mind is Sham and Ali had a very close friendship, and she was, I think, sort of also studying with him in a sense. And they're very linked, and 1 minute they're on the bike and together, and next minute separate. So this quality of aloneness is something that we skirt, the issue of this quite a lot in our lives. We don't quite completely face up to it in a way. And in the warrior tradition, which I was trained in Shambhala and the Buddhist tradition, there's a lot of willingness, you could say, to confront that reality, that aspect of reality, and also, in a sense, learn from it. And the most powerful message is that we have tremendous potency in terms of how we structure our reality, and that process really originates in our mind. And of course, we have body and we have speech and we have emotions, but mind in the sense of the formulation of consciousness and how we see things, how we shape our world, right? So from a Buddhist point of view, we are shaping our reality, and even to the point where you could say, two people with the same, I often say this, but Stephen Hawking's, is in a wheelchair and is, has complete physical obstruction, but seems cheerful and kind of creative. And then you have somebody else who has a hangnail and, they're having a really bad day. So what we extract from that is that the state of mind that we have is the point of origin source of how we shape the world around us. And even to the point where we would say that the world around us in some sense is a projection of our mind. That's, of course, everybody goes, wait a minute, it's real, it's out there, you can touch it, you can put your hand on it. That person really is a jerk. It goes from there. It goes from this sort of sense of discrete, concrete, external reality to now we've inhabited it with people and they have certain attitudes and we have certain attitudes towards them. And we take the whole thing to be completely sort of real and tangible. But if anybody's done any meditation practice, you start to see that the whole way we formulate that is somewhat questionable. And that's really a very powerful thing to recommend to a practitioner, is just look at how one is formulating the world, how one is shaping the experience of being alive, and look at the root cause of it, the root generation of it. So in Buddhist terms, we say that's the mind. That's what we call the mind, and it seems to be completely important, if you want to look deeper into this than just the surface level of making assumptions about what is true and what is not true, to isolate. If, like in any good scientific experiment, you want to see the effect of one element, to isolate that element and really take a closer look at it. So, in a sense, we're sort of putting our mind under a microscope when we meditate. I mean, there's a lot of different meditative traditions, and some are prayer, and some have a lot of assumptions about what's happening. But in this raw quality of awareness meditation, that's mindfulness awareness meditation, we don't have too many assumptions. We don't make, it doesn't start from the ground of assuming anything. So I remember this interview when Trungpa Rinpoche first came, my teacher Trungpa Rinpoche came to the United States, and obviously it was like, he was Tibetan, it was like having a man from the moon land, from the point of view of a lot of people. So the people were interviewing him on the news and stuff and saying, well, as a Buddhist, what do you believe, And he just kind of looked at me and he just said, well, as a Buddhist, I don't believe anything. And it's not nihilistic. It's not like he disbelieves everything. It's just we don't start from the ground of assumption about even the nature of ourselves or the nature of the world we're in, or any particular assumption about what kind of powers there are, deities, and so forth. And also, even in Buddha's time, when you have this great realized being there, he's telling everybody, don't take my word for it. That's a very famous teaching that he gave there, and right before he died. So the notion of not taking somebody else's word for it has to be accompanied by the idea of, though, if you're going to say that, then you have to see for yourself. To see for ourselves, we have to create some ground in which that seeing for ourselves can happen. Because most of the time we're caught up, in whatever it is that we think is happening. So this is where, what Maxwell Smart used to call the cone of silence. Which is like, in my vision of it, there would be the cone of silence and the person inside would be meditating, would be sitting. And you're not really taking new data in at that point. You're not taking new input in, very importantly. And you're also not causing things to happen, by manipulating your world and your environment and your communication. Which is, if you think about it, even if you sit and listen to somebody for a minute, without trying to manipulate what's coming in, and just experience it. Or if you're just walking through the woods and you just look around, for a minute, without trying to manipulate your experience, you move into the realm of pure awareness. And you just see what's there. You see how the mind works. You see how the sense perceptions operate. You see how we build up storylines around simple events. I mean, one way of talking about confusion and pain and suffering is we build up complex storylines around simple events. So we look at that whole process, you could say, from a neutral or open perspective. That neutral, open mind that is just simply awareness itself, in our tradition, that's one version of meditation. It's just the mind becoming aware of itself, aware of the processes that are happening. No judgment, no comments, no nudging, no finagling, Just let it be as it is, but take note of it. Be aware of it. So as you guys know, to do that we sometimes use a little device or trick of bringing the mind back to the breath, or to, you can use a variety of ways to just bring the mind back to the present awareness. But essentially, in that present awareness, then we're looking at how our own mind works. That's what's in high relief. If you're in present awareness, part of that is seeing the play, the activity of your own mind. How you shape things. What you're pissed off about. What you're longing for. And you see them, instead of as objective reality, you see them as thought forms and energy forms. You see them in their pure form, in a way, as energy, right? What's a thought? Where does a thought reside? Why do we take it completely so seriously, that we think something about somebody? We never look at the thought itself, so we're already buying in. So this is an important aspect of why we advocate some kind of aloneness, just so we can see this process. So, even if we love somebody so much, and we feel so connected to them, both people are still fundamentally alone from this point of view. And, if you look at the mind, for example, even in our closest relationships, we basically are spending most of our time alone and in our thoughts. So even when we're making love to somebody, we're thinking about something. Usually, if we're, having dinner, if we're having a powerful conversation, if we're having an argument. So nobody really knows what's going on inside somebody else's mind exactly, down to the level of text, storyline. And that's true for our thoughts, emotions, concepts, sensations, and our whole realm of experience. It's extremely personal, and it's extremely unique to ourselves. Even though we can have resonance and simpatico with people, our experience of life is a very personal and unique experience. So in the meditative tradition, we acknowledge that, and at times, just at times, isolate it so we can see it more clearly. There's no notion of retreat or solo practice being a kind of end game. It's a mid game towards seeing more clearly. If we don't see clearly, the classical images, we will continue to mistake a rope for a snake. That's the sort of classical Buddhist definition of confusion. There's a rope, we've projected snake onto it, and what we see is a snake. Seeing things as they are is seeing the rope as a rope. And this applies to every kind of level of phenomena. So, a brief pause. I see a lot of new people have come online. So I want to just reiterate how you participate in this conversation, which will happen in a few minutes. Open a second window in your browser, go to facebook.com/David Nichtern, and in that second window you'll see a scroll of comments. There's 28 comments there now, and people are already starting to write stuff in. If you hold off a minute for specific questions, I see a lot of you seem to be doing good. Vanya's saying, timely talk, David. Today I'm officially divorced. Well, I can relate. I'm not officially divorced, but I'm moving in that direction. So I think 2012 was a homewrecker of a year for a lot of people, just sort of shifting realities there. So anyhow, Seth, did you put down the link? Yes, you did. Okay, so click here to sync. You'll see in the middle, click here to see the live video feed. And then did you put down how to put the link so you can see all the conversations? Yeah. Above that it says click this link to see all the comments and questions for this live broadcast on our one page. So, okay, so now I see people still gathering, so hopefully you are joining in with us at this point. And if you missed something, all these talks are archived, so there's, I think, about 50 or 60 of them already at this point. So I'm pretty soon going to run out of things to say, so I might have to start repeating myself a little bit. But, that's Buddhism for you. There's merit in repeating and sort of going in deeper each time. So we'll take that with a grain of salt. So what's the flip side of this aloneness? What's the flip side? Because everything it wouldn't be ancient wisdom if there wasn't a yin and a yang, right? So there's got to be a flip side. And the flip side is that even though we're alone, our consciousness, our experience is completely interdependent with actually all other beings, and as well as inanimate, quote-unquote, aspects of our environment. So at the same time as we're kind of completely cut off, you could say. And if you've ever really experienced aloneness, it's beyond loneliness. It's a recognition of a completely solitary or unique space. And you're the only guardian there. You're the only person in that particular movie. It's like I went to the movies at 10:30 out in East Hampton, a couple of weeks ago, and I was the only person in the movie theater. So that's the sense in which the movie that's going on in our head, we're the only person in that movie theater. Nobody else is watching that particular movie. But on the flip side of it, everything that happens to us is linked or interconnected with not just the people we know well, but in a slightly more diluted way, the people we know less well, and a slightly more diluted way, everybody who exists and whoever existed. I think they call it the butterfly effect, right? If the wings flap in China, there's some causal relationship to something that happens in the United States, or vice versa. So interdependence is you can't understand one of these things without the other, as far as I'm concerned. If you say, we're all one, and it's all groovy, and we're all together, and it's all one thing, and oneness, and oneness, and oneness, but you don't understand the singularity of your experience, all you've done is just mushed everything together, basically. And I would say, from my personal point of view, we can argue about this all we want. Of course, we love doing that. But, that point of view, there's some element of wishful thinking in it. Wouldn't it be great if we were all one something? But so in the middle way school of Buddhism, we say it slightly differently. We say we're not one, but we're also not two. So the Madhyamaka school says not one, not two. We're not the same, but we're completely interdependent, completely connected. You cannot define oneself without that notion of interdependence. But you also can't look at oneness without noticing this sort of diversity and singularity of different points of experience. So right now, our dear friend Sham is on a new trajectory. We don't know what he's experiencing right now. We don't know if he's experiencing anything. We have in Buddhism a certain way of talking about the transmigration of consciousness. In Hindu tradition, there's a slightly different way. Christianity, a slightly different way. Nihilism, there's no way. There's nothing happens. So even in contemplating all that, we're completely alone. Even in choosing which point of view that we're going to take to describe the oneness, we're alone. So this is powerful material in the Shambhala and Buddhist tradition. We kind of, you could say, embrace this aloneness. And I'm not talking about loneliness. You don't have to embrace loneliness and being desperately cut off. We're not talking about being cut off because you're completely interconnected. But we embrace the singularity of our own existence, but not the false notions about it. And when you get into the false notions of that singularity, it would be what we would call ego clinging. You start to build up that singularity, and it's like Mr. Potato Head. You put glasses on it and a mustache and big ears and a lot of drama happening around. And that is not exactly what we're talking about in terms of the aloneness. That's more like you experience the aloneness and then you add entertainment. So in the sort of more practiced point of view, you add that entertainment, but it's sort of ornamental, and it's not taken all that seriously, But we do have a sense of re-engaging the world and putting on clothing and, and a kind of a relative existence, but it's not a trap anymore. We're not trapped by our own projections anymore. The suffering that most of us are experiencing is because we're trapped inside our own projections. Otherwise, it's very simple. And when you meditate, you see this. Definitely. If you have good instruction and a good practice, you start to see that the mind shape that you have, which has become so familiar and so kind of repetitive, and habitual, is only a shape. And it has a strong habitual quality, but no essential reality. None. Yikes. We're really getting into it. So, that's kind of the flip side now is that individuality, which is not the kind of phony individuality, and it's interesting, this is something I heard a talk that Shamdas gave on the internet today, and it really was talking about the same thing in a way. To not get caught up in the fake identity, the forge. You don't forge your passport and then go like, that's really me, the fake identity. So whatever that is, and whatever wound that's covering, whatever sadness that's covering over, whatever openness there is, to put on a kind of fake identity cover-up. That's what we mean by ego. It doesn't really have authenticity, It's like bad acting. Ego is bad acting. You haven't really identified fully with the simple kind of quality of being alive. So you act, you hold on to props, and create situations and dramas. So much of what we're experiencing is that when people have some insight into that, if they do deep practice, it's kind of a little bit unnerving, actually. And it's called emptiness, experience of emptiness. There's a lot of more space than we've filled a lot of space with our stuff. So worth thinking about, but more worth practicing and actually working with it and seeing it. So the interdependence, though, is like every gesture, every thought, every extension of our body into space begins to have implications for our relationship to others, even though we ourselves are fundamentally alone. So this is what you would talk about in Buddhism as the Hinayana, which is you work more with the individual liberation, and the Mahayana, where you begin to feel that interconnectedness much more strongly. It's like a vivid sense of you're feeling other people's aloneness, and also their pain and confusion, and it's a bigger field, and you know, in some sense, you could say your singularity begins to dissolve into a sort of more open perspective. So, within our tradition, and you know, I'll just say a few more things as usual, and then we can start to talk, which is kind of more fun. But within our tradition, aloneness is experienced by doing meditation practice, in which there's no intervention, there's no direct communication, there's no music, there's no talking, there's no manipulation of the experience. There's not a very extended technique. There's just a simple technique of working with the present, maybe a little touch of mindfulness in there. And even if we're doing that in a room, which I have done many times, you know, with 100 people, every once in a while, you know, somebody else sneezes or farts or whatever they do or falls over. That's always the best, when somebody gets sleepy and they actually fall all the way over. Those moments are few and far between, and a lot of the time you're just sort of spending, you know, working along with your own thought process and your own emotions coming up, and getting very familiar with those. They're not so easy to just disband and, you know, go like, okay, well, that's empty, so I'll just see right through that. They become quite solid over quite a long period of time. And so one of the sort of advantages to being alone in that way is we start to see the transparency. It's like the rock, our experience, which had a rock-like quality, becomes more like glass-like or translucent. See through it. You have a vivid thought about hating this person or whatever, or needing food, or you know, wanting to move or something, and you just see right through it as if it was imprinted on film, you know. So this seeing the transparency of thoughts is a benefit, you could say, and just seeing where we get stuck, where we get caught up. Certain kinds of thoughts, most of it. You know, maybe it's resentment, or maybe it's jealousy. You know, we get really hung up, and so seeing the openness and fundamental transparency of the mind can be liberating at a personal level. And even if we're practicing with a group of people, essentially each one of us is doing that practice. So maybe we come together for a time for a discussion group to share experiences. Maybe somebody like me or a teacher gets up and gives a talk to sort of point out some of these things. But essentially, the heart of this tradition is, if you don't want to meditate and be alone, this is the wrong tradition for you. Period. Over and out. If you just want to talk about Buddhism and the great philosophies of it and stuff like that, I guess it's, you know, as good as anything. But the heart is, the essence of it is to practice, and to practice we have to really work with being alone, and work with ourselves alone. It's not anybody else's fault. Nobody else is we're not working for somebody else. We're just working alone. So that can be, you know, 20 minutes a day. You pull out, you unplug, you take your input-output port, turn it off, and there, boom. There you are, naked, finally naked, without your paraphernalia, without your rig, without your amp. You know, it's unplugged. You're unplugged. A lot of insight comes from that. Then you re-enter, right? Now you're back. You know, now the kids are screaming. You know, now the boss is being unreasonable. You know, now you're having trouble sleeping. Now you're dreaming. What about that? You're having a kind of vivid dream about somebody chasing you somewhere, and you don't even recognize anybody in it or what's happening. But still, this is your mind, right? It always makes me laugh when people have dreams. They don't recognize that it's their mind. As if somebody injected a dream into their mind. So somehow this is all the activity of our mind, and we take some time to really work with that very deliberately and see certain aspects about it and develop certain insights about it. Maybe one insight is we could have more compassion and less aggression, So you can work with that. But the essential practice is just seeing, the path of seeing. Then, even 20 minutes or half hour, an hour a day, we don't necessarily go in so deep into that, It's like drop down into the well, We still, we're just dipping into the well, having a little drink of water. So there's this notion of retreats, and even if we do a group retreat, some of us, I know, have sat for a week or 2 weeks or 4 weeks in what we call in our tradition a datun. And you've got plenty of time to swim around there. And there's all kinds of people, and some of them are irritating as hell, and some of them are really dynamite, and you can't wait till the no talking sign is off. Or you can't wait till it's on with some certain other people. And of course you have to eat and go to the bathroom and walk around some. But it's dramatically reduced activity. And it's deliberate. So you can experience that aloneness more fully. Everybody should try that. If you're sort of taking this point of view and saying, I want to be a Buddhist, this is definitely part of it. It's an important part of it. And then the idea of solitary retreats, where people go up for a week or a weekend, month. Some people do 3-year retreats, although those are sometimes group retreats. And then, the serious, heavy-duty meditators can sometimes spend serious time in retreat. But everybody comes out of retreat. So it's not like it's obviously some kind of cultivation that's happening there that's better to do alone. And in our tradition, in the Shambhala tradition, we look at the idea of we can cultivate in a very kind of powerful way, very concentrated way. And then we can keep that awareness active, that kind of crystal awareness, even when we're talking to somebody or at work or in social relationships. So that takes a sort of sophisticated understanding to realize that at the same time as you're in that office, you're also in retreat. It's subtle. And it means that we can continue to work with our state of mind even while we're working with others. And in fact, if we want to have a quote-unquote enlightened society, which is what Shambhala talks about, or a good society, or a good family, or a good relationship, we have to have some quiet in ourselves. It can't be all noise and action. There has to be some space. So that's, again, the principle of aloneness. Even we're having a very deep interaction with somebody, there has to be some notion of it's not going to just fill all the space. So the last thing I wanted to say is that there's a lot of poetry written about this, in the Tantric Buddhist tradition, or in the whole Buddhist tradition, kind of a romantic quality, lonely moon and death approaches, I always associate with the sound of the koto, the Japanese digong space, There's like a tremendous penetrating quality and then a very spacious quality. And then maybe a poem comes out, it's a different aesthetic, different than blah, 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 and we've got to communicate and keep going all the time and feel everything. So this romantic quality is part of the warrior tradition, that there's some sense that we are born alone, we do die alone, we live alone. But instead of looking at that as a kind of fundamentally crushing, bone-crunching reality that we have to do anything possible to avoid coming face to face with, that we flip that, we reverse that logic, and just bring our mind directly to it. It's very poignant, it's very sweet in a way. And from that ground, then when we relate to others, it's not delusional that they're going to be able to save us. Something is going to be able to prop our existence up, so that we know we can fully engage without grasping, which is the sort of end game. The fully engage without grasping. If you can imagine that. So this takes training, We're talking about training our mind, lojong, training our mind. And it's very personal. You have a lot of respect for anybody who's undertaking any kind of training. And this training, even though it can be sort of, in a sense, organic and part of our life, is also can have an austere quality to it. In a positive sense, a non-diluted, non-wishful thinking quality, very realistic, powerful. So there's a lot more to say about it, but it's an important part of our tradition. It's something that our teacher Trungpa Rinpoche used to talk about quite a lot. It's interesting. He talked about aloneness, and he also talked about enlightened society. Isn't that that's quite a range? So I'd like to open up, for conversation now. So I see even more people have been coming and going. So I want to just reiterate that if you are joining us or have joined us late and you don't know the drill, what you do is in your browser open a second window, go to facebook.com/DavidNickTurn, and then you can write your comments in. You'll see, a whole bunch of comments. You have to refresh the browser every once in a while, or go to the link that we put up, where you'll see all the comments coming up. So I see a lot of all our dear friends from around the world here in our virtual community. So I just want to start addressing some of these issues, comments and questions. Okay. And this is a good time. If you have a comment or question, please feel free to write it in at this point, the way we've described it. You also can address somebody else's comment or question. Okay, Sharon brought up a question. You can work on understanding your own mind and projections, but how do you work with other people's projections that they place onto you? I almost, if we were live, I would throw that question back to you, Sharon, and maybe you do want to take a shot at it. How do you work with them? Probably the simplest answer is with compassion, some kind of sympathy, rather than like getting too uptight about it too quick, and maybe a sense of humor and often I think there's more play in the situation than if other people are doing that and they're projecting onto us, which is inevitable, by the way. It can trigger reactiveness in us, and you can notice that. You can see where we're reacting in a kind of almost habitual way, and cut through that. And then if there's room to communicate more genuinely with that person, or maybe you have a bone to pick with somebody. We're not talking about polite society here, where nobody ever has a conflict or wants to say something meaningful and kind of not pleasant to somebody else. That's not what we mean by enlightened society. But there could be a certain grace and a certain gracefulness, and finding the right and skillful means. Finding the right time and place, and this is a very deep thing you're asking there. I think we have to find our way towards, do we respect people? Do we love them? Do we appreciate them? Even if they're messed up and laying it on us. It's possible to cut through that without cutting through the person somehow. You cut through the confusion without cutting through the person. Or sometimes we just have to accommodate people and be patient. And, sometimes by being a little bit more fluid, you can find your way through those kind of things that doesn't turn into that, right? So, but I'd like to hear what you say, okay? So, Sharon, you can write in again and make your comment. So Emma is saying, I have found, by the way, if you're watching this on the archives, repeat, obviously you won't see the people's questions, so I'm going to read them. If you're here live now, it's happening in real time. Excuse me. Emma is saying, I have found that when I have strong negative emotions about someone or something, that is a really good opportunity to look inward. Not judging the situation, person, or myself, but looking at my feelings more closely, yet from a distance and at the same time. That has given me a far more objective view of myself, even though I am looking inwards, and has led to some incredibly profound experiences. Hard going, but seems worth it. Is this aloneness? Well, yeah, I mean, it's a dimension, I think, of what we are talking about here. And of course, the tricky thing is when you're in play, which is, like what Sharon's question was addressing, you're in the action, so to speak. We can't always calculate and calibrate. It'd be the thing of like, the meditation timeout. Somebody's starting a fight with you or something like that. Or whatever they're starting with you, an interaction of some kind. And you go, hold on a minute. This is upsetting me. I got to meditate here for a minute. So that's kind of too, that's difficult. That's not going to work. So, but getting a whiff of our own reactivity as we're interacting, and sort of having one eye inward and one eye out. I think that makes a lot of sense, Emma. So maybe thinking of one eye in and one eye out in terms of how we're looking at ourselves in the mirror, and at the same time we're sort of interacting outside. So we're alone and we're interactive. Hi, Marzia from Rome. Yay, Marzia, you're so regular, and we keep you up. I know it's 2 a.m. there or something like that. So I hope you had some pasta and are feeling good. And sometime you should, Marcia, write me an email and let me know, what you're up to there, and just tell me a little bit more about what you're doing, because I see you so regularly there. I'm curious about your life in Rome and so forth. Okay, so that's for anybody who wants to write directly. You can email me davidnickturn@gmail.com, and I think of it as ongoing chess games. If somebody has a Dharma question or thought. And then, as quite a few of you know, I work with people one-to-one. So if anybody's interested in that type of situation, just email me and let me know that. So Emma is saying, I've also found that the outcome leads to action, karma. Okay, so that would be the one eye out. So that finishes that. Elaine Bots, is there a line where we become selfish and push others away when we should be sharing ourselves and growing during the pursuit of self-searching aloneness? If so, is there any way we can see that line more clearly? And I would say definitely there's a line or a balance. So that's why we're talking about working inward and outward as the full picture. But if our activity is too outer directed, then we haven't looked enough at our own process. And if we're too introverted, we're looking too much at our own process. So I would say definitely there's a line, but the line indicates a balance. And you have to sort of feel that. And another way you feel that is, if you work with a teacher, like we did, you get some feedback and some guidance on that. There's part of the path is definitely working with the chemistry set of other people and how they trigger you and what happens. So if you live in a place like Karma Chilling or one of the retreat centers for a while, it's amazing how alone you feel, but at the same time, how close everybody is. You feel completely claustrophobic. There's basically no good practice environment that shouldn't feel somewhat claustrophobic. Welcome to Buddhism. It's not about just extending our comfort zone. It's about exploring the part outside the comfort zone where 99% of reality is living outside of the comfort zone. So that's worth contemplating. Okay, let me just refresh here. So again, we have about 10 or 15 more minutes where we can just discuss this topic and anything new you want to bring to it, or based on anything that we've said so far. So if you have a question or comment, type it in now. A lot of people are just saying hi. Let's see. Okay. Hi, Jenny. Hey, Jenny. Jenny likes this. David is happy when Jenny likes this. Okay, so Melora. Everybody's here tonight. This is a good party tonight. Virtual party. I wish we were all together and we could just have some food after it. That would be really fun. So, Melora Griffiths, so no snakes? Lovely to be alone with another with a strong enough connection, knowing what is going on in the other's mind, or at least the curiosity to want to know. Difficult to fully engage without grasping when we do feel this kind of connection? That was a question mark at the end. Is it difficult to fully engage without grasping when we do feel this kind of connection? That sounds like it doesn't need a question mark, Melora. It sounds like a statement. So ultimately, seeing clearly, insight comes from creating space. And most direct way to experience this is meditation? Yes. The simplest answer would probably be yes, because you know what we're talking about. Meditation is the ground for opening up a kind of clear view. It's a kind of add-on. It's like building a deck out on your house so you can see the river. And then you go back into the house and you relate to the people in it. So it's not meant to be like a completely total, okay, now you're alone and you're isolated, and it's just to enable you to see more clearly. So ideally then at that point you can start seeing some of the things like you're alluding to, because you just said a great thing there, Melora. At least the curiosity to want to know. That's a very powerful thing to say. And then how disciplined are we going to be if we have that curiosity in really going with it? Or how much are we going to hang back and go, I have the curiosity, but I'm not doing anything about it? So that would be called laziness, right? At that point, if you had the curiosity but you don't activate it, that's based on laziness. And then you said, do we feel this kind of, is it difficult to fully engage without grasping when you feel intense connection? I think that's an amazingly good question for all of us to contemplate. Can we connect without grasping? And that's, in a way, people talk about non-attachment, but grasping's better to use as a reference point. Of course we're attached and connected to all kinds of things, but are we grasping at them? Are we clinging? Or do we have some confidence in our own, aloneness and our own experience so that we can have the communication we need to have without grasping and clinging? That's what we're sort of training in it, and it's going against a habit of habits of a lifetime. Okay, so Joe Bundy. Joe, you know what I'm talking about now, right? Joe knows. David, to read more about this topic from Trungpa Rinpoche's body of work, what would you recommend? Wow. It's kind of laced through all of it. Sometimes his poetry, like First Thought, Best Thought, that book of poetry has some good references to. There's one poem there in particular about aloneness. So, and it's, a poem is worth 1,000 texts, so pithy. But I would say, The Myth of Freedom might be a good book to look at again. Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism. Those early works were really laced with this flavor of being willing to there's a chapter called The Hard Way, The Open Way. It's not easy. So I think when he came here in the early 70s, he was giving people that news back. This is not easy. This is not learning how to eat candy and get fat. It's lean and mean. And because of that, it's powerful. And it's not mean spirited or aggressive, but it's kind of direct and penetrating. So I think his early works is what I would say off the top of my head. Okay, let's see. Let's see what else is coming up for everybody. Let's see. Great. I just want to say to all of you who've been coming every week, it's so wonderful. I see so many of the same people. I really feel like, maybe next year we'll do a retreat that everybody's invited who's part of this community, and we can, I recognize some of you are far away, but this year I am doing a retreat for my birthday. My birthday present to myself is to have a retreat for all the students I'm working with one-to-one, and that's in 3 or 4 weeks. I thought, what do I want for my birthday, and that's what I decided to do. So, okay, so Sharon's back. First I'll read Jenny's, which is very funny. Uncle David, snake, rope, rope, snake pour, peak, snore. This is the creative mind unleashed of Jenny Mulder. Thank you for that. So Sharon, in responding to my request to respond to her request, is saying, not sure what to answer you, but I guess my main way of dealing with people's projections is by telling them very directly and clearly, I don't think you are seeing me. I think you're putting something onto me from your own mind. However, my experience is that most people aren't that interested in looking at their own projections and just think you are projecting your own projections onto them, I assume. So, I think, Sharon, that would then move into the category of skillful means. If that strategy or that approach is not working, then you have to look at what's the point of hammering. You have to have the hammer meet the head of the nail. Then something happens. So hammering on the wood isn't particularly productive. So if it's not working, that's a message going like, try something different. Try assessing whether that person would be open to that kind of feedback before you give it. Sometimes people ask for feedback, and that's to me a wonderful thing, And then you have to assess whether they really want feedback. People in the music business ask for feedback, but they just basically want you to tell them how great it is. So you have to sort of get a sense of who you're talking to, and the way you get that is by, listening and feeling, and recognizing sometimes you're not going to get satisfaction, which is, I think, what the element here is. That's you want satisfaction of being heard a certain way. And sometimes that's just not going to happen. So, there's no one answer to that other than being very alive and awake in that situation and sensitive. And overall thinking they're not a bad person. Maybe it's my own lack of, go twice towards taking the blame. Maybe it's my own lack of clarity. But if it's theirs and they don't want to have that conversation, there is a very good chapter, I think, in Myth of Freedom where Rinpoche says, if you try too hard to, cut through somebody else, you become a monster to them. They just look at you and see somebody who's looking like, they're coming at them. So there has to be ground there, and even then it can be, very, very challenging. I think you need more than one approach is the main thing. So Neely, because I live alone and work alone a lot of the time, I find that I really need to pay attention to my interactions with others to learn where my comfort zone ends. It's amazing when I pay attention to my reactions, the little things that make me judgmental or how I'm annoyed by something someone else is doing that's actually a lot like something I do that I don't like. Well, in all honesty, I always am looking out for that. When people annoy me, I have a sneaky, creepy, annoying feeling that there's something familiar about it sometimes. It's like you're chewing on something, you can't swallow it. So I think, any creepy, sneaky feelings that we have that we want to cover up kind of fast are absolute fodder for this kind of, practice, right? But I appreciate what you're saying. So I think it's a good comment. So Jose, I think, is Jose or Jose, I don't know, so forgive me if I pronounce it wrong, but I'm curious, can you say more about how our innate wisdom or basic goodness comes into play when it comes to clear seeing? Yeah, it wants to come into play. If it was basketball, it wants the ball. And we keep boxing it out. Our little confused, habitual cocoon self, if you want to use Shambhala lingo, is boxing out our wisdom, and it can't get the ball and it can't get a shot off. So, it's there all the time, though. It's there all the time. That's the notion of basic goodness. It's basic. And it's sort of our fundamental open-heartedness and our fundamental wakefulness. And then the logic here is that it gets covered over and obscured. Not that it's fundamentally ever interrupted, actually. So Sharon follows up, can we be intimately connected without grasping? How can we be empathetic and connected and still keep our boundaries intact? This is an issue I have. I get too immersed. Yeah, well, also, Sharon, I know we're going to talk one-to-one soon, so that's, a good topic to go into a little deeper maybe than, any quick flip answer I could give here. But I think other people would identify with it. How can we be empathetic but also sort of hold our seat, as we would say it, and kind of keep our keep the clarity rather than, the image, that you and I have talked about is, one person's in quicksand and you're jumping in to save them, and now there's two people in quicksand. So that's what we don't want. So keeping some kind of ground and not over-identifying in a negative sense or too boundaryless, too much without boundary, over-identifying with somebody else's dilemma. But I'm sure this comes from being an empathetic person and being a sympathetic person, and part of it is just it's on the price of the ticket. And then the other part is, really understanding that you actually can't do it for somebody else. I've come to that painful conclusion because, as everybody knows, my nickname is Nudgy, and I like to do it for other people if they would only let me do it. And honestly, I call myself now the meditation teacher formerly known as Nudgy. You cannot do it for other people. They have to practice. They have to come to it their own way. They have to go through their own process. And so when we look at our need to do it for them, there's something else in that need that's kind of, you could say, not completely healthy, coming from an imbalance within us. Okay. Elizabeth, hi from Chicago. I'll watch you talk later. Thanks for doing this. You're welcome. My honor, my pleasure. Neely, what I meant in the above post is the smaller interactions I have with others, since I don't live with my family, or interact with coworkers every day. Cashiers at the supermarket, even the people on the road with me, sometimes you have to have some interactions to really get the kind of aloneness you're talking about. That's exactly right. And we have to have that balance. If we don't, and I'll just kind of sum it up, if we don't understand interdependence, we cannot understand aloneness fully. And if we don't understand aloneness, we won't understand interdependence fully. So I'm setting those up as a kind of balance that we have to know from our own lives how we can work with that balance. And we should, as human beings, feel free to come together, I think, and talk about these things. And that's what we call satsang, right? Community. And I'm just going to go back to my dear friend, Sham, who I really, really enjoyed having satsang with, Sham. We didn't just talk about, what movies have you seen? We talked about this kind of stuff till 5, 6 in the morning, really trying to hone and sharpen in our understanding of the Dharma and the world. And that's called satsang. It's kind of a very pure kind of communication, and it's very much encouraged in most of these communities to actually make sure you have satsang, that you have time with other practitioners to share notes, and that, never, whatever level, that's always important, to have peers, to have some people you can kind of compare notes with. So that, when I think about Sham, I think that's what I'm going to miss. I'm going to miss satsang with Sham, and the kind of edgy and perky, bubbly, humorous, loving, rollicking quality that, he was his and his alone. So I feel like there's a space in the world that's exactly the shape of Sham, and it's just a hole right now. But we don't have to fill it. We don't have to fill it. So I think maybe that's okay note to end on. If you have, I'm moving next week, but hopefully I'll be able to do this Tuesday night if I have Wi-Fi, which I should. So hopefully I'll see you all next week, next Tuesday, same time, same station. And if you have any good ideas for topics or anything like that, please email me those, or you can post them on, the Facebook message. And I hope you have a good week alone and together. And I send love and best wishes to all of you.